Hi everyone, here is my presentation on studying animal behavior with animal cameras. I am Spencer Houston from Headwaters Science Institute, and this was the coolest thing that I saw in my presentation, an elephant drinking water during sunset in Africa. So why are we doing this research? For centuries, scientists have been studying animal behavior by watching animals and making observations. However, during the COVID-19 outbreak, many scientists and students like you are stuck at home and can't make these animal observations. I and the rest of Headwaters were wondering if we could use web cameras on the internet to study animal behavior. So why do we study animal behavior? Studying animal behavior is important because it allows us to better understand the needs of different types of animals. This tells us how we can best protect them and provide habitats that can help them be alive and healthy. Many of the animals I watched in Africa were endangered species like elephants, and it's really important that we know what these animals need to survive so that we can protect them and keep them happy and healthy. So what was my research question? My research question were generally what factors affect animal behavior? But specifically, I was interested in how does the time of day affect the types of behavior animals were doing? My prediction was that we would see more types of animals and types of animal behaviors during the daytime. I thought that this would because it's warmer and easier to see during the day, it might be easier for animals to find food. These gazelles right here look like they may be having a hard time finding food to eat during the dark, and it might be easier to find something to eat during the day. So how did we do our experiment? The materials we used were pretty simple. We used a data collection sheet, a stopwatch, a web browser, and some of the webcams on explore.org. Here's an example of one here. It's daytime where I am in California right now, but in Africa, it's nighttime. You can see a couple birds on this camera over here. So how we did our experiment was we started by writing down where the camera was, and we recorded the time, weather, and other animals around in the webcam during the time that we did that recording. Every time we watched an animal camera, we did it for 5 minutes, and we made tally marks for every type of animal behavior we saw, whether it was eating, drinking, fighting, swimming, or whatever we saw. So what did we find? Let's take a look at the types of animals we saw first to give you an idea as to what we're thinking about. So here we have the average number of animals we saw per trial during the night, sunset, and day. As you can see, during the day, we saw a lot of birds and elephants right here. We saw different types of animals during the night and the day. As you can see, we only saw antelope at night as well as bats. And things like frogs, we didn't actually see, but we could hear a ton of them on the microphone from the webcam. I will say that the bird, cricket, insect, and frog data we have is a little bit of an estimate because we could hear many of them on the microphone of the webcam, but we didn't actually see which one was which. So we gave it a number that we called 15. Really, there were probably more than 15, but we can just say that we know there were a lot of birds, or a lot of crickets, insects, and frogs at the day that we saw. We also saw a couple rabbits, a giraffe, even a crocodile. So, thinking of our question, when do we see more animal behaviors? At night, sunset, or during the day? We thought that we would see more animals during the day, but we were actually wrong. We saw more at night, almost double the amount that we saw during the day, whereas sunset was a little bit in the middle. So the last thing that we have to graph is how did different types of animal behaviors change between the night, the sunset, and the day? As you can see here in this first column, the most common behavior that we saw was eating or drinking. We saw animals doing this all the time, and if we saw animals doing any one thing, it was probably this. The next thing that we saw that was kind of interesting that we didn't think we were going to see was calling. A lot of the birds we could see making sounds as well as hear them, and tons of insects and frogs, we could hear them making all sorts of sounds. I didn't expect this, but it was kind of neat. Another thing that we saw a lot of was moving. Many animals just walked, swam, or flew through our webcam as we were watching. We don't know where they were coming from or going, but they seemed to be going somewhere. Another fun thing that we saw was playing. We only saw this a couple times, but we did see some animals playing with each other, which makes sense. But that's pretty much all we got. So what does this all mean? The most common things that we found were insects. This kind of makes sense because there are way more insects on Earth than there are mammals or birds or reptiles. We also saw a lot more insects during the night, as well as frogs. This might be because maybe insects might call to each other during the night to find a mate. As I said, our claim was incorrect because we observed so many things at night, which was way more than in the day. If we think about this a little bit, I maybe had a little bit of bias towards the daytime because I live during the day. I'm not active as night, so I maybe wasn't as willing to think about all the things animals could do at night. One of the other interesting things that we saw in our project was the impact that insects could have on the animals around them. This giraffe that we watched for a few times here, it's hard to tell from the photo, but about every 3 seconds, this giraffe would shake its head like this to shoo off insects around there. We also saw this with many of the elephants and antelope that we saw. It seemed like the insects were really having a big impact on what the animals do. Maybe they would swish their tail or not stay too long in one place because there were always seemed to be some type of fly or mosquito landing on and biting these impacts, biting these animals. So kind of what does it all mean? I learned through this project that animals spend a lot of time every day just eating and drinking. If I think about my day, I maybe spend 2 or 3 hours a day eating because I have a refrigerator and can go to the store. But many of these animals don't, and an elephant has to eat a lot of grass throughout the day. It was also interesting to see how different animals and different animal behaviors happened at different times. This makes a little bit of sense because some animals are maybe better at being out during the day, where others are more nocturnal and are better at being around at night. I think maybe some of the insects were out at night and calling so much because predators that might be searching for them, like birds that rely on vision, might be asleep. So maybe when animals did the type of behavior they did depended a little bit on the predators that might be hunting for them. A couple neat things that we saw were some playing. I mentioned this before, but in this screenshot, you can kind of see this baby elephant here is playing with this other baby elephant right next to it. I didn't expect that we would see this, but you can imagine play is an important behavior for young animals to learn the skills that they need to survive in the wild on their own. Another thing we didn't expect to find is calling. The birds or bison or antelope, they all made a lot of noise. I tended to think of nature as someplace kind of quiet, but really, when we listened to the microphone for these webcams, it was really, really loud. And so all these animals were making all sorts of sounds. I don't really know what they were saying, but I could tell that they were doing something with all that sound. So if we were going to do our research project again, there are a few things that I might want to investigate. One thing was, how does the animal behavior change during the day or night? I mostly watched most of my daytime measurements were in the hours leading up to sunset, and my nighttime measurements were mostly in the handful of hours after sunset. So I wonder what would happen if maybe I watched the animal cameras more during the middle of the day or the morning, or the same thing with the night. What happened in the very middle of the night at 3 or 4 in the morning? I wonder if animals have different behaviors then. The other thing is I only did this over 1 week. Right now, it's spring in the northern hemisphere and fall in the southern hemisphere, where many of these animals in Africa are. I wonder what might happen during winter or summer or different rainy or dry seasons in Africa, and how that might affect their behavior. The last thing that would be kind of neat to investigate is how calling impacts other animals. What would happen if we heard a lion roar? Would everything go quiet, or would animals keep chattering amongst each other? Because that was some of the most common things we heard, it'd be neat to investigate that more. So that's all for my research project presentation. I hope this gives you a good example as to what type of presentation you could do, and that you learned a little bit about animal behavior here.